Goodness, this is a lovely, quiet street, considering it's not that far from the centre of Edinburgh. I'm here to talk to Markus Stitz, the fastest person around the world on a single-speed bicycle. Now, I spoke to Markus in the first episode of this podcast series, actually, about that journey. And I also spoke to him a year ago. I was in this very street. He just moved in to talk to about his then new book, Great British Gravel Rides. So I'm back a year later, and it's another book, Bikepacking Scotland, that I'm here to talk to Markus about. Now, I'm going to give Markus a little bit of a hard time about this, because in my view, it's not Scotland's best bikepacking in this. It's quite a few of the best bikepacking trails are not in here, and I wonder why. Is it just the book of Markus's website, Bikepacking Scotland, of the same name, where you could get most of this material for free? So we'll hear what he has to say. I'm heading into the house now to have a bit of a chat.
Did you know this is that you're only the second person I've done 3 chats with?
Oh wow, who's the other one?
Donnie Campbell.
Oh cool.
And we did the first ones were always during the pandemic. You were actually the first person I spoke to.
Oh, that's cool.
And then a year ago we did the one where the riding one, which was on your first book, and you've produced Bikepacking Scotland the book in a year. Now I knew it was coming because I remember you telling me about that. Yeah. But still, that's quite a thing to get together in a year. Could we start by defining bikepacking? Is it, and good luck with that, by the way.
Yeah.
Is it just what everybody used to call touring?
You know, this is interesting because I think if you would have asked me that very same question 4 years ago, I would have possibly been quite vocal about that it is not. And I think over the last couple of years, I think I'm coming more leaning towards the answer that it is. So I guess I do think there's a slight distinction between bikepacking and cycle touring in as such that if you look at like a classic touring setup, you know, when someone said to me cycle touring, especially coming from Germany, the thing that would spring in my head would be 2 panniers on the front, 2 panniers on the back, and then possibly one of those backs on the handlebars and not so much either a gravel bike or a mountain bike or anything else. So I do think this is where bikepacking, and if you would have asked me the question, what is bikepacking, then a couple of years ago I probably lent towards it's a mountain bike, mainly a hardtail mountain bike with back strapped on the seat post, on the handlebars, frame back and top tube back. Now, if you look at bikepacking setups these days, I think we seem to have merged both things together. So if you look at Tailfin, for example, basically build a whole business model on the fact that they're doing a carbon rack and strapping a back on the front. So I do think simply defining it by the type of bag that's used no longer cuts the mustard, because it's quite really hard to do.
I suppose it's though inline bags though. That's a big difference that we didn't really have.
That's true, but then I think it's funny enough, you look at some of the Ortlieb bags these days, and they're kind of going back to panniers on the front, funnily enough.
Yes, they are actually, yes.
And then fat bikes, you know, like if you look at some more extreme stuff, if people ride the Arctic or any of those extreme temperatures, they do have panniers, and I think the good reason for that one is that you have to be less disciplined with how you pack things into those bags. So I think if it's really, really low temperatures concerned, I think you don't want to faff around for too long trying to get your backpack.
Lower centre of gravity?
Yeah, possibly as well. So, you know, so I do think, and we had that very discussion when it came to the book, whether we should include the very term cycle touring somewhere in the title. Because I would argue that some of the routes which are in the book, they are cycle touring routes. You know, they could be ridden on a cycle touring setup, and I think it's the same I had with my gravel book as well. I think in general, I don't have a problem, but I think it is really difficult to define those things or give them a definition as such, because the lines are blurring all the time. And what you say is like, so gravel riding is interesting because I think well, if you ask someone of a younger generation, they possibly say, "Oh, gravel riding is something that came up in 2013 when Salsa poured out the Fargo, or when those bikes thing." And if you ask someone who's my generation or older, they would possibly say, "Look, we used to ride on gravel roads from the very beginning onward with panniers on the front and on the back." And I remember my touring days in New Zealand. I started with panniers. And I the bit I enjoyed the most was the Rainbow Road from St. Arne down to Hannah Springs, and that's what that would now be one of the most iconic gravel journeys. So, in a way, we're going back and forth, left, right, and center with that. So I think defining it by that is, I think the only thing I would say where bikepacking is potentially different from cycle touring is that you tend to find people going much more off the beaten track. So I think if I would think about cycle touring in a classic sense, and again, I'm possibly slightly biased from having grown up in Germany. So if someone goes cycle touring in Germany, you would most likely choose one of those wonderful long distance routes, purpose built for cyclists. No other traffic other than a few walkers and skaters or whatsoever. So that for me was cycle touring, and you possibly ride a few rural country roads, but that's about it. I think it's not. It wouldn't be crossing the Alps, because for that, up until we had bikepacking bags, you would have a really, really heavy backpack and have everything strapped to your back.
This is the Rough Stuff Fellowship type stuff.
But this is where it's interesting. Like, I mean, but then if you look at the Rough Stuff Fellowship, those people in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they would take a pannier-laden bike over exactly those tracks that people tend to ride on a full suspension mountain bike now. Yeah. So it's just like
those Caradice seat posts. Well, they weren't seat posts. What were they? Saddlebags is the word I'm looking for. And the amount of stuff people could get in those was phenomenal.
Yeah. So it's kind of like I think all of that. I do think, which is nice to see, and this is why. It was nice to do a book on that one. I think in general what it does show that cycling is popular and people use cycling. I think for me, any form of tourism that utilizes cycling to go to visit places, and you don't even have to call it tourism, because sometimes tourism has a bit of a image attached to it as well. I think it's just simply travel to explore places by bike. I think for me that is either bikepacking or cycle touring. You can call it whatever you want as long as you do it. It's a good thing.
They're kind of synonyms. Somebody had a go. Does it have to be camping? You see, somebody had a go at me for this, because they said, "Oh no, bikepackers get really annoyed when you then go to a hotel." It's like, who are you to define the rules, mate?
No, I don't think so. It's just it again is one of those. No, it does. For me, clearly, it doesn't have to be camping, because I'm also giving people accommodation.
Of course,
in the book, and I also do think there's something about. No, it doesn't have to be. Yeah, of course. Like, camping is possibly the easiest way, because you don't have to pre-plan anything. Especially in Scotland, you can just find a nice campsite in the middle of nowhere. But I do stay in hotels. I do stay in B&Bs. Just and even if you look at races,
especially if someone else is paying. Sorry,
but,
beg your pardon.
It's like there is absolutely, and it's just look at racing. I do, and this is possibly the only criticism I have with. So Jividu this year had this rule, which was basically based on this definition of that you have to stay outside, and I just don't think that there's a necessity for it. And I also do think that bikepacking, and this is coming back to the argument, I think it's good for local communities, and if I'm traveling to local communities, I really want to go give back to them in some shape or form. So that can be by either eating locally or staying locally.
But it's good for you because you're interacting with people, especially locals.
And you get to know an area much better. So for me, it's kind of like, I think it's a nice mixture sometimes, because I do love wild camping as well, and I also do like the idea of keeping things simple, and sometimes it's really good to choose the least comfortable way, which happens to be, I think, exactly the right thing in a certain situation. So that's a nice thing. But even then, even with wild camping, it's great if you roll into a local pub, you have a nice meal there, have a pint even if you want to, and then at some stage, especially in summer, you roll out by 10 o'clock, do another hour of riding and find a nice camp spot somewhere. So
and hope the midges have gone to bed if you're in Scotland. Yeah. I'm holding you up drinking your coffee.
No.
So while we're in this definitions phase, does it matter for the routes that are in your book, but also in your mind, whether or not bikepacking is done on a road bike, gravel bike, mountain bike, fat bike? Does that fit what you're saying? This kind of like, no, these terms are interchangeable between touring and bikepacking. You can still go bikepacking on a road bike.
Totally, yeah. I think my standard answer: any bike you have is a good bikepacking bike. So the bike should not be the barrier which keeps you away from doing it. And I hopefully, if you look at my bikes, I ride a 1970s Claude Butler single speed. That's possibly my favorite bike for anything because it's simple and just, even with 28mm tires, you can go on a gravel track. That's fine. So no, and that guided the selection of the routes as well. Yes, I think naturally, if you look at a book like this, it will be, especially these days. I do think gravel cycling in a way has become quite. People naturally associate bikepacking with gravel bikes these days. That would have been a totally different thing about 10 years ago, where if you look at the Highland Trail when I first rode it, and that was in 2014, those were really, really lightweight hardtail mountain bikes.
Does anybody use a gravel bike on that now?
I wouldn't cycle the Highland Trail on the gravel bike. It's one of those.
Quite, sorry, yeah. I thought that's what you were...
It's just a bit too... I think it's a bit too much. Two reasons for that. I think the geometry, there's some really steep descents in there, and a gravel bike's just simply not designed for that.
Yeah.
And there's also some of the climbing. A gravel bike is a very, very universal bike, but if you want to go up some steep, super steep ascents, that is mountain bike territory. This is the 30 on the front, 50 on the back, and. I'm as much as I'm a person who I love simplicity, and I do question some of the moves the bike industry has made in last years. Not questioning anything like e-bikes or things like this, but I would question, why do we need different bottom bracket standards when it was perfectly fine to have. So I think some of that is done purposely to get more people to bike.
And brakes as well.
Yeah.
Brake standards. Crazy.
Although the simple, I think the simple concept of a disc brake has been a fantastic invention.
But there's 45 different types of pad.
So that sort of stuff I do not agree with, but I do think there is for some of the trails, a mountain bike is simply the better bike to ride. And I always find it's like, I think it's quite interesting to kind of see that gravel bikes tend to be now 55mm bikes. So you kind of, we're technically on the mountain bike now. So it's like, and
Put your flat handlebars on it.
Yeah.
Just a couple of bits and pieces about the book. There's a Bikepacking Scotland, which is yours. There's a Bikepacking England and Bikepacking Wales.
Yeah.
Did you have to fit a template when you were doing this? I was just intrigued as to whether... I haven't seen them, and I was wondering whether you felt constrained by that, or whether they said, hey, Markus, you've done one of these before. Go ahead and do your own thing.
So, simple answer is no. It's not... I think... So they're not very different books, I would say. So if you look at the layout and the way things are presented, I think the books are quite similar. But I do think I think naturally it's two different authors. I know Emma well. Emma's featured in my other book as well. But I think we had from the outset a very different approach to things as well. And I think we're also I'm developing bikepacking routes full time. This is my income, it's my living. Whereas Emma is a teacher, so her writing is something she does in her spare time, which is even more impressive if you think about it. They follow. They look the same. I would say they're very different. And I think this is the conversation I had with Vertebrate from the very beginning, because I was quite keen to make a book that really reflects my work and my type of route setting. So I think the big difference between the two books is that Emma's routes are all of a similar length, and I thought that wouldn't fit if I put my name on the book, because I obviously done routes beforehand, and people will have written those, and they will expect. Doing a bikepacking Scotland book without featuring some of those routes would possibly not do it justice.
Because you've got routes here for families, you've got routes for e-bikes, you've got routes for single speed bikes.
Yeah.
What actually? What's the difference? What would you look for? Actually, what would you look for in a single speed bike, since you're the single speed in a single speed route, rather, since you're the single speed man?
Yeah. So I think in a single speed route you want to have hills in there, but you don't want anything too extreme in there.
Right. Okay. That's what I was guessing.
or if you have, so there are routes where you have to push your bike anyway, and some short sections. It doesn't really matter. It's actually easier to push a single speed bike because it tends to be lighter. So that's the kind of thing. So for a single speed, that would be the criteria. And I think for a single speed, you want to have a good mix of off-road and on-road as well. For e-bikes,
somewhere to charge.
Somewhere to charge. And I this is one thing where I think we are very far behind the continent and other countries in this. So it was simply the routes. So one of the routes for e-bikes is the one in Highland Perthshire, where I do know that there's infrastructure. There's at least 4 charging points that were put in about 3 years ago. But it is to be honest with you, if you're on an e-bike, I think, and this is coming back to the accommodation situation, I think you just have to be realistic about things. So I do think if you're bikepacking on an e-bike, which in itself I think is a great thing, because I think it will open up the outdoors to a totally different group of people who so far thought it's not for them, or simply who didn't have the ability. And those are also people, and I know that from personal experience, people who have possibly been at the very top of the athlete spectrum and then had an injury, and then all of a sudden they can't do anything. So I do think it's really important for especially for mental well-being for those people to be able to do something again. So e-bikes are great, but in infrastructure, let's be realistic about at the moment. If you're touring on an e-bike, you need to carry your charger with you, and you need to stay in accommodation. I think it's like you can possibly stretch it if you do short days and do a night's camping, but you'll end up eventually having to charge your bike.
But you've been in Morocco, because you did the Morocco race. I was there on a road touring thing 6-7 years ago, and there were people touring on e-bikes then, and they were getting charged in places where you would think they ran donkeys and nothing else. Yet they were getting charges there. So it's got to be within the will in 2023. And I've had a bit of a bad start to my year. I've had an injury, and I'm waiting to get the NHS to sort it out. And I was sitting in the window the other day thinking, if this was a long-term, permanent thing that stopped me from riding hard, and I'm really not at my best at the moment, I'd have an e-bike.
Yeah, totally.
Like a shot, and that would still let me get out and do the kind of things that I would want to do. So I'm totally with you on e-bikes. So the question I was going to ask you, and I think we've possibly answered that in this, is who would you see as your typical audience for this book? Who would pick it up? And I can see the appeal to someone who's thinking from the e-bike point of view. I can see the appeal to families as well, because there's a certain amount of certainty knowing you have done the route. They can see it on the video, and because the videos are linked through the QR codes on here. Have I missed anyone out? Who else would you see picking up this book and going, oh, I quite fancy that?
So when I moved to New Zealand in 2007, so when I moved into the country, so imagine someone who sits on the plane who has absolutely no idea of the country he's traveling through. There was simply because I didn't have any time, and it was a rather spontaneous decision to go there. And then the first thing I did, I picked up a guidebook by the Kenneth brothers, which is actually we're sitting up on the shelf there.
Right. Next to the Jura. It's one of my favourite whiskies. Certainly the best whiskey. Right.
Yes, it's and so the Kenneth brothers did this guidebook on great New Zealand mountain bike rides, and it was spot on, because that was my So I was going from having no idea what to expect in New Zealand. I think if you buy a guidebook, you need to have a certain curiosity to let the guidebook guide you. It's in the title. So I think this is the sort of person. So I would kind of think of someone who either lives in Scotland or wants to visit Scotland, and wants to do adventurous things on a bike, as possibly as broad as possible, that definition. And I've always seen any of my work, I do not think that if I plan a route, that is the definite thing people need to do. It's such a subjective thing. Some people like going to places, others don't. This is the kind of thing. So I think like any route which I designed or which is in the book it gives people an idea what to do, and I would really like to see them then kind of using that as an inspiration to either cycle it, brilliant, or come up with their own version of it, or chop it into places.
So this is a starting point.
I think it's a starting point, and this is why I try to make it as visual as possible, because I do think that good imagery is really important on that journey. Like when I remember when I moved to Scotland, there was a Lonely Planet guide specifically for the Highlands and Islands, and the first thing I would always do is to go to the middle section, because that was the section where there were nice pictures, and I would look at the pictures and kind of go like, that looks cool, and then I would go from that to kind of see, because I think, again, it depends on what kind of person you are, but I think our worlds become very visual, like if you look on social media and the sort of stuff. So I just try to think, how can I present it in a way that people like, I was quite particular about choosing the images as well, just to kind of really have stuff that represents a route, and that's the sort of thing. It will also potentially be experienced bikepackers who've done a lot of stuff, and I guess if you look at the book, it's a cycling guidebook, but I do also think that there is a need for guidebooks that take you into places in Scotland that, again, using off the beaten track is a very cliched word, but I do think there is really a need. The version I have in my mind of Scotland is not necessarily the version that some of the mainstream guidebooks will present to you on their pages, and there's some so mules and cow and beef, for example, is one of those examples. I'd possibly argue you'd be hard pushed to find any guidebook who would feature those, but they're great, and it's like, I think you really experience a country by its heart and its soul in those places, they give you a very unfiltered, very authentic picture of the Scotland, and I think that's, for me personally, that's a really important thing. And then hopefully, so it's also a guidebook. I don't think you necessarily need to be a cyclist. I think there's enough information, hopefully, in there to find out about those routes and those places. And if you cycle there, brilliant. You can either walk or take the bus or take the car. Even so I think.
I mean, one of the good things I thought about this was you had a reading list in here.
Yeah.
And top of the reading list, I thought, was one of my favourite books, Ralph Storer's book, Exploring Scottish Hill Tracks.
Oh yeah, fabulous.
Which is brilliant. I've been using that for decades. Yeah. If you can get hold of a copy, please do so.
Sitting up there.
I'm speaking to our audience. So yeah, that I think that's really good.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking was, and I live on the West Coast, and there's a kind of almost arrogance on the West Coast that West is best. That's actually a saying. That's actually a hashtag. Mm-hmm. And as we were coming, we had to drive down because we're in the van, we're going to go and do a bikepacking trip, 7 days, into the Scottish borders as part of the Rome-Scotland Rally, because we don't know it and haven't done that before. But as we were coming down the A9, and we deliberately went that way, I was thinking, I know the Cairngorms from a hill walking and climbing point of view, the bit to the left, But Liz actually turned to me and said, we haven't actually been cycling through there. We don't know that area very well. And I was thinking, because I'm going to come on to some criticism that you've actually already answered about the choice of routes in here.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm going to negate my own criticism, because I thought I would use your book as a starting point to look at where the kind of the nuggets are,
Yeah.
and then see if I could widen it up. Because let's do that. Because 16 of the 20 routes in here have got videos with them,
Yeah.
And it's very handy. Click the QR code, you get to your YouTube channel, or the Bikepacking Scotland YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So, to what extent is this book, Bikepacking Scotland, really the best bikepacking in Scotland, or is it the book of the website? I mean, could you have found a lot of this information on your Bikepacking Scotland website without buying the book?
Some of it, yes. Yeah. And this is deliberately, like the philosophy behind Bikepacking Scotland has always been, and that won't change, that I do think that any of the projects I've done through Bikepacking Scotland should be free for people to access. So I wouldn't want to charge people for a GPX file, especially those projects have been collaborations with tourism organizations, whatever. So I do think it's fair, and I think this is important. I think there's a thing about elitism and accessibility of the outdoors. I do think there is. Let's be realistic about that. Like, I mean, bikepacking, if you got all the kit and if you got all the bike, it is an expensive thing to do.
Absolutely.
And I'm fortunate enough in a position, and this is it's good to be honest about it. Over the years I've been sponsored by companies, so I was in a very privileged position to be able to do all of those things. And this is something I can go back to the community. So not all the routes which are in the book you will find on the website. And so the routes on the website, and also not all the routes on the website actually made it into the book. So I did actually choose. I made a selection. Some of the routes on the website, they were kind of predefined, like the Capital Trail, the Bada Trail. Those were routes which have become classics in a certain way, I guess, from what I can judge. It's really hard to judge how many people are actually doing those routes.
Do you get feedback on social media from those? Just on your trail?
Yeah, I do.
Because the Capital Trail's gone bonkers.
The Capital Trail and the Bada Trail, I think possibly the two routes. And I do think to a certain extent the Go East Lothian Trail, but it does attract, and it's been designed for people who not necessarily shout the loudest on social media. Right. So I think, again, like you'll get a very tweaked picture. But coming back, so... But there's also another thing about it, and I there are routes like the Cairngorms Loop, the Badger Divide, the Highland Trail 550.
Yeah, they're not in there.
They're not in there.
You've got a profile of Alan Goldsworthy. is it Goldsworthy?
Yeah, of Alan. So
Goldsmith.
Yeah. So I think there's one. So the reason why they're not in there, they're not in the book because they're not good bikepacking routes. Absolutely not. They're great routes, but I also do think they have a good profile already. So it's like they are attracting the audience already by the thing. So I do think they don't necessarily need a guidebook in order to push people in that direction.
And you'd be accused of overuse as well.
Well, and then there's also, I do think. Well,
I'd be giving you a hard time about that, actually, if you did.
No, and I also do think, like, I've written this book as an author, and I think it would be a bit unfair to take someone else's work. and putting it in a book, this is
you mention them. You talk.
Yeah. This is like I just, and I do think I was very, very keen to have Alan involved in some shape or form in the book, because I do think Alan is a really humble and modest person who does shy away from a lot of media. So Alan is not the sort of person
I need
who
to
would
get him on a podcast. I need to chat to that man.
But he's done so much for bikepacking in Scotland with the Highland Trail, with the route and the race. And I just thought this needs to be noticed in some shape or form. And again, like Stu with the Badger Divide, I like by including Ross O'Reilly, who's a local frame maker, who literally said to me, "Look, I love the Badger Divide." So it was like I tried to have like a bit of a link in there, and you also like in the route descriptions you get like further recommendations to do the routes. So I think and also I mentioned this in the beginning, and I think this is something which I'm really, really keen to. So Bikepacking Scotland is not just Bikepacking Scotland, and neither is it just me. Absolutely not. It's I think we're in a very, very fortunate position in Scotland that there are people, quite a few people who are out there. They're creating routes. They are promoting cycling in Scotland, and I think that's a great thing. It's a community. This is the kind of thing. Like I think for me, bikepacking. Whenever I go to a bikepacking race, I go there because I like racing. I like to push myself. But the other 50% is also I get to know that this is like a family. You kind of walk up, you see the people say, "I'm just."
Well, this is like the Dirt Dash events you put on. Yeah, they're incredibly social.
And I just think this is actually such a cool thing because like the activity you're doing is something which, in itself, is quite sustainable. I'm saying quite sustainable because there's also things about cycling I possibly don't like,
especially carbon frame.
But in itself, it's like I think like if you want to take it down to the very bare bones, it's good for Scotland. It's good for the communities. It's good for people to travel around. Those people who bikepack around those places, if they act responsibly, which I would argue the majority of people do, because people are well aware of the fact that bikepacking does depend on nature. You can't do bikepacking really. I mean, if you just bikepack to heavily built up urban areas, it's going to be quite boring, quite difficult to do as well.
I mean, it's that, isn't it? It's that view on the cover of your book.
Yeah, the Isle of Jura is kind of like is a thing, and it's just the kind of thing. So, yeah, it's great for communities, and it is a great community. So I try to like. I'm just trying to. There's the further routes. There's those profiles in the thing. I also do think it is important to mention something like the North Coast 500 because it does attract a lot of cyclists to it, or the West Highland Way. They're two routes I personally would potentially not cycle at certain times of the year. Because I also think my idea of bikepacking for me personally is to get away from the madden crowds and to kind of have a place for myself. But I also do know I like that, but I also know that some people might not like that because they're social animals and they like to have a few people around and like to say hello to everyone every now and then. So it's just I was just trying to find a way. Yeah, this is not it's not a best of bikepacking in Scotland book.
So or the definitive guide to all the trails.
And then this is like I personally always think like and I'm deliberately shying away from that sort of things. For some of the publicity about the book, people ask me and name your top five routes. Yeah. Now you'll find 3 different articles with top 5 routes, and they're all different routes.
Excellent.
So it's kind of like if I do think it's really hard to choose, but I also do think that it's certain this. Again, like sometimes people like that simplicity, and people, I know that there's people who say, look, like I really want to have your opinion. What is your favorite route? And
I think journalists just do that. And they want it because they can fit 5 on a.
But no definite guide. I think it's if you look at the book, of course, I've done a lot, and it is very much a reflection of my style of bikepacking, and. Fair enough.
I've been actually looking at this track here. This is the cover of Bikepacking Scotland. I'm looking at now. I did this. It would be 1999, I think. No, 2000.
Oh, right.
With Liz, and I was on a Dawes Galaxy tour right the way up to Canuctra Farm, and then we went back, got the ferry that went up from around to Colonsay and over. It was all part of a big tour, and again panniers, the whole works, and the world comes full circle. It reinvents itself, and often.
So for the listeners, we're looking at the cover, which is on the Isle of Jura. And there's a subtle backstory behind the cover because
is that Jenny you're with?
No, there's Philippa
Okay,
Badger
sorry.
and Josh Ibbott. And so we were actually...
Oh, right, that's not you.
No.
Oh, no, yes, it's gravel bike.
Is one thing as
Yeah.
well. I think you will also find in my last book. I don't want to have myself on the picture of a book because I do think it's kind of like, again, like if it's.
But you gave Josh the cover of your book. That's
Yeah.
very generous of you.
Yeah, no, I do think it's important. I wanted to have a man and a woman on the front because I do think like we need to see much more women on pictures in books and magazines, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. So it's very, very. So there's some
No
criteria I have.
participation without representation.
Yeah, it's very important. People need to picture themselves to do something, and I think it's just it becomes ever more so important.
Sorry, anyway, tell me this.
So the backstory behind this. So I used to work as DJ for 12 years, and so the thing that I think the story that always attracts me, or this is kind of like which kind of introduced the Isle of Jura to me is the KLF building £1 million in a boat shed on the Isle of Jura. So
Or
when we-
did they? Which is the other
I think
thing
they
as
did.
well.
I mean, it kind of
Well,
looks like
yeah.
they did a video about it. So
Yeah, I know, but they've done a one since where they went back.
Yeah.
And there was some
Yeah.
not absolutely sure. But yeah,
But
okay.
It's a good story. Like with
Oh,
any good
it's-
story, I think there's a certain amount you need to believe in.
Yeah, quite. Okay.
But so I thought this is like, so my life before bikepacking was
Yeah.
actually like, I
DJ,
was a DJ
and
for a
it's
long,
brought
long
it
time.
forward.
And the KLF, like the White Room, the album from the KLF, is still like, I think it's like one of those albums which is timeless. Like you can listen to it right now and you think like, wow. So having the Isle of Jura, and also
George Orwell, one of the
George
world's
Orwell,
most
yeah,
famous
and-
books written on that.
yeah, and
island.
it's also, I think, it's like one name which is very closely connected to this book is Karen Tobin. So Karen used to be the development manager for Wild About Argyle, and when I started the journey, so this book is basically the work of 6 years, and I remember when I came back from the round the world trip, I was kind of done with just having a marketing job. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, but I also thought like there must be something else. Like I think for me, doing the same job for, I don't know, decades is possibly not my idea. And then the Bikepacking Scotland journey was what was to come afterwards, but it was very difficult to start with. Like any new business venture or any idea you have, like, because I was always told this is very niche. So cycling is niche, bikepacking is
It's a
even
niche,
more niche.
sub-niche.
And then you talk to someone who's been, who's created a certain attention by riding a single speed bike around the world. This is as niche as it can get. And it was like, I had a lot of people saying no to me, saying, look, yeah, we might like the idea, but realistically,
Yeah,
we
you're
don't
not
believe in
big
it.
enough of an audience to pay you for it.
This is not going to work. And Karen was the person. She had seen some of my work and said, "Look, I really, really like this, and I also do think there is a future for this." And she was the one who managed to organize funding for doing the Wild About Argyle Trail. And this is like, in a sense, for me, is it's great to put Argyle on the front cover because they've really they've invested heavily into cycling, and they've also shown a certain trust. It's not always an easy journey because realistically to kind of, so if you look at the project, is like, I always think like it needs to be measurable in some shape or form in order to show success. And that realistically is only possible after 2, 3, 4 or even longer periods. And so you can't, so if you design a route, no, it won't get people into the area straight away because people plan holidays. Sometimes I
Yeah.
think the journey between, even if you pick up the guidebook and you actually do something in the guidebook, that might be 2, 3, 4 years. This is realistically, that's the time frame. And I said that to Karen. I said, like, we really need to design this project in order that will not be an immediate success. We're starting from scratch here, and we're also starting against a wall of naysayers who believe it's not the right thing to do. And it's always encouraging. And on this journey from there have been many people. So the one thing I always found out, like, is just to ignore those naysayers and really, like, focus on the people that actually believe in the idea and say yes, and work with them and make things happen, because those are the people who you can do stuff with, and thankfully there have been a couple of other people along the way. The Go Estonian Trail was the next one, so Elaine and Claire from the Estonian Council, again, like we said, look, we want to do something for families. We think that's a cool thing to do. We want more people to come from Edinburgh by bike. Mm-hmm. Let's do a trail, and that's kind of like some, again, it wasn't decision making. I think the one thing we haven't talked about, which I think is quite important to say, is so certain criteria for choosing routes also was the proximity to public transport. And that comes back to the accessibility argument, because I do think that a lot of tourism is still very, very car centered and focused, and we kind of like often by default assume that people own a car. I don't own a car. I don't own a car for the reason that I could buy a car if I wanted to, but I don't. I live in the centre of Edinburgh. I don't see any need for it. And I hire a car every now and then. If I need a car, I can hire it. But I often found that a lot of the guidebooks you find, they kind of like automatically assume you own a car, and this is how you get to the start and finish point. Which is possibly not as problematic if you've got a loop, that's fine. But if you go to back and forth route, then how are you going to get from A to B? So some routes made it into the book because they were super easily accessible by public transport. And I think if I need to weigh that against other criteria, it would be rank really high for me. Because on one hand, I'd love to encourage more people to take the train or to take the bus to places. And also kind of in order, so I'm kind of doing it as much as I can, and I think there's this preconception that is utterly difficult. Sometimes it is. If you're a group of 4, it's almost impossible to get from A to B in Scotland. But if you're a solo traveler like me, or if you go with 2 people, it is often possible. So I think your choice is possibly more driven by convenience other than practicality. So this is the other thing as well. Just not all of the routes are directly accessible by bike. But most of them are, and I just think, like, in order to change people's habits, what we really need to do, we need to give them the tools to do that. And I think it's in the guidebook.
Well, it helps that we've got those new carriages coming on the Oban service. The one up to Fort William now. Apparently they're there. I haven't used them, but
I've used them a number of times, and they're super good. But again, like I heard there was discussion about, they're not used, they're not full yet. That is normal. Like for decades, we made it incredibly difficult for someone to travel by train with a bicycle. Now we're giving the possibilities, which and kudos to ScotRail. I think they get a lot of slack, but I've traveled by train in a few countries. They're actually quite a good provider. I think the one thing we need, which is, so in terms of accessibility, like bikes travel for free on trains. There is a huge thing. If you look at countries,
the space it takes up,
yeah, and it's also like, I think, so in Germany, like some
of the spaces they've got for bikes are ridiculous.
Yeah.
The hangers on Virgin were just crazy.
Yeah, that's true. But I also found, if you tell them, and if you're explicit and you tell them this is not working. So again, on the intercity trains, the new bike spaces that ScotRail put in there, they are actually really good.
Well, you managed to do all your last book going around the whole country.
There are some crap bike spaces on trains. Let's be quite honest about that.
And so hard to book. I mean, we would like to start from Edinburgh at this ride we're doing tomorrow. But our van has to be in North Berwick, because that's where the repair is, and it's down for a week. Can you book bikes on there on the app or on the website? No. You just put them as full permanently, because it depends on whether or not there's space. That sort of thing is just frustrating. But anyway, we could bitch about this for ages.
No. The thing is, just like, I'm always kind of like, I'm generally a sort of person who is trying to focus on the good and the little progress that's been made, and I do hope at some stage that will encourage possibly even more progress.
Well, I remember last time, I don't know if you told me in the last podcast, I did ask you what's next, and I think you told me, but I don't know if the recorder was running when you did. I think it was one of these things I could tell you, but I'll have to kill you. So, are we the same for your next one, or is that you done with books?
It's just like, so is this one of this question? If you ask that question during the book process, the answer would certainly be no.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that one. Oh, I meant to say, sorry. The maps in here are excellent.
Oh, brilliant!
Yeah, I really. I mean, because so often you look at a map and you think, where exactly is that? They've got some little rubbishy hand-drawn things. These are really clear. Sorry, you were going to say in the process.
So yeah. What's next? I'm certainly not done with book writing. I really enjoy the process. Actually, it's something I do believe there's a place for good, well-researched print information, and hopefully that's what the book is. We there's a lot of work that went into it, and it's like I'm also the sort of person if it doesn't feel right for me, then I'm happy to go out again. There's been a number of the routes where I said, look, I still got 2 Sundays before it goes finished to the publisher. I really want to see, whether maybe there is an even better path, and often there is. So it's kind of like, so it's kind of, so there's 2 things I'd quite like to do. So I do think there would be, like, I've always toyed around doing an around the world book, because I've done my single speed book, and so far I've kind of shied away from that.
Not as a guidebook, hopefully.
No, not as a guidebook. No, I think there would be a
very small market.
That'd be
around the world on a single speed.
Something you could call niche. But maybe a travelogue from there. I still got plenty of pictures from that trip. So possibly if I were to do it, then it would be kind of a nice mixture of pictures and writing. And I think the other thing I do think, and this is something I've kind of really recognized along the way, and this is something we are possibly guilty as ultra cyclists or whatever. Like, I do think there's a need. So if I look at this and I look at Great British Gravel Rides, there really is a need to give more information for people just starting out cycling, and also people who are looking for shorter journeys. So I think something along the lines of Great British Gravel Rides, but really putting shorter wing. So it's because that's one of the feedbacks I had for my second book, or the first solo book, Great British Gravel Rides. When we kind of think about, and this is, and I think this is very much the evolution of a sport. So, if you would have picked up a guidebook about mountain biking in 1989, it would have been gnarly stuff on hardtails, because I don't know, Clunkers is an interesting film, but the image you get from mountain biking and Clunkers.
Can I tell you something about a guidebook that was done in Northumberland? I don't know if this is true. This is just a good story that is told, because I'm from Northumberland. That one of the very early guidebooks, it was so rushed. They had a route that actually went through the live firing area of Otterburn Military Range. Now, having been in there for filming for the BBC when they have been live firing, you wouldn't want to be there.
No.
So it was somebody who looked at a map and didn't bother go out and check it. And they'd done that extra check up there. And I believe they were all popped. But I still have some of those very early guidebooks.
Yeah.
And Clunkers doesn't even come close.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But it's a good film, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, again, looking at the evolution of gravel cycling and bikepacking, I do think there is a market for shorter stuff, and I've seen that. Like, I've just been in the Netherlands for a weekend away with my girlfriend, and we hired some. So we didn't take our bikes because we were just there for 2 days, and it's just too much faff. And we hired like some it's like a typical Dutch bikes, and. But even there, we were great to ride on a gravel trail. And so I'm just thinking about something which is a bit more accessible. Because, like, I think if we really want to open up cycling to a wider audience, and I really, like, on the top of my wish list, like, I hope that I can make a tiny little contribution to that, getting more people on bikes. That's the thing that's needed, because this is again, and I was at the UCI Gravel Series today, And I do think the most heartwarming moment of the whole thing, it was a great setup, and you get all the pros and fast riders going out. And then afterwards was this race of 10 kids on their balance bikes for 10 meters down the road.
Brilliant.
And I was just like, this is so cool. This is exactly what we need. We need more of that. Because I do think like cycling can have such an important contribution to making our everyday lives a bit less car dependent, a bit, I do think it's one of those activities which is great as a leisure activity. I love my adventures on the bike, but then the bike's really handy as well to simply get you from A to B quickly in the town. And I think something that sits in the middle of that would be great. There's also, there would be enough routes in Scotland. Like this is the kind of thing, with any guidebook, you can only cover certain areas. There are areas in Scotland which I know that are not included in the book and would have been great to include. In the end of the day, as with everything, you need to make a choice, informed choice, and it's just so.
Well, I'm glad you've left some for us to explore.
Yeah, but this is the thing. I think a guidebook is a good snapshot, and I do hope that it triggers people's imagination. And that's a good thing. We talk about tools online and AI, etc., etc. I think for me, all of those tools are really, really handy. They made route planning easy. Have they made a guidebook redundant? No, because they are still, in a way, and this is why I said that before. It's a very personal book. It's a very personal choice, and that's okay. But I also know that I've ridden every kilometer in this book, and I've stayed in every place that is mentioned, except one or two potentially, where I've kind of relied on other people's opinion, people I trust. And the food choices as well. Again, this is it's a very subjective and kind of thing, but it gets people started. And then I think if that is the thing between doing something and not doing something, then hopefully people are doing it.
I do like Markus. He's very sincere in what he does, and he does it all very well. There'll be a link in the show notes to buy his book on Amazon. And also, if you would mind, buy me a small virtual coffee. It's just a little payment, and I put it towards the hosting costs for keeping all these episodes live on the server. And if you could possibly leave me a review on whatever platform you're listening, Apple Podcast, wherever, that would be fantastic. I'm Simon Willis. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.